All right, guys, so recently I had somebody online, as well as a friend of mine who's in med school, asking me about maintenance training. Basically, the idea being that either you're super busy or you're injured or something that is not allowing you to train to your full potential. And so you're really just trying to recover as best as you can and maintain the progress that you've made. So I just want to go into that a little bit today. So obviously right now and for a while now, volume has been this really hot topic. People are talking about how higher volume is better. People mention how if you want to continue to grow, you have to add volume over time. And while I generally agree with that principle, I don't agree with some of the people saying you need 20, 30 sets per week in order to grow. And for maintenance, it's much, much lower. There seems to be quite a bit of evidence now that even as little as 1/3 to 1/2 of the volume that you were doing before should be fine to maintain your muscle. And so if you were doing, let's say, 12 sets a week for chest, you could probably get by on 4 sets a week for chest during this maintenance period. This is something that I've had to do a few times when I've had pec injuries. I would cut it down to maybe 2 to 4 sets per week. And frankly, I really noticed almost no difference. There's a pretty dramatic difference in the amount of volume you need to grow versus just maintain what you have. This is why you'll see a lot of people who don't take it as seriously anymore still have very impressive physiques, because if they get into the gym even once a week, maybe twice a week, they're still going to maintain 90% of their progress. So again, whatever you're doing now to grow, if you're going into a period where you just need to maintain, if there's no reason you need to do that, you're just taking a little bit of a break, you could cut it maybe to half. But if you're really struggling for time or recovery because of an injury, I would say cut that down to as much as 1/3 and see how you do with that. So the next component would be frequency. So there's frequency in terms of workouts per week, and there's frequency in terms of how much you're hitting each muscle group per week. Now, a lot of people are completely fine with just hitting a muscle group once per week. Most of the evidence shows that 2 or 3 times per week is optimal for muscle growth. But if you're talking about specifically just trying to maintain here, I would say once a week is perfectly fine, which kind of then brings it back to how many days per week do I have to be in the gym, period. If you watch the podcast with Greg Nuckols and Eric Trexler recently, we were talking about somebody who was a top level guy who was doing all of his working out basically in like an 8-hour workout on Saturday. Now, obviously, if you're crunched for time, that's not ideal either. But the point is, even if you have to cut it to once or twice per week during a really stressful period of your life, you're probably going to be okay. You could do a full body workout twice a week, or you could do upper workout Saturday, lower workout Sunday, if for instance you only had the weekends available to you. And most people are going to be able to fit that in. An hour on Saturday, an hour on Sunday is very reasonable. Now, are you going to look just as good doing this? Probably not. You're probably going to notice a small decrease. But again, if this is just during a very strenuous period of your life, it's not necessarily even going to be beneficial to go more than that, because now you're taking away time from recovery, resting, sleep, all of that. So if you can just get 4 to 6 sets, let's say, per body part on the weekends done, you're probably going to be okay as long as you have sufficient intensity, which would be the last component to discuss here. Now, again, most studies show that under most circumstances, 60 to 90% going near failure is going to provide equal growth. If you're doing sets of 70% to failure versus a weight that's 90% to failure, similar in terms of hypertrophy as long as you have sufficient volume. Now, if you're talking about occlusion training, there are studies showing as light as 30% of 1 rep max will still give you great hypertrophy as long as you have this occlusion method going on. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're just talking about traditional training. So again, as long as you're sticking to moderately heavy weights. So in terms of rep ranges, what does that mean? Could go as low as 1 to 2 reps. If you wanted to just try to maintain that peak strength, could go up to 12 to 15 reps. You'd be perfectly fine with that. You really don't have to do that much specific here. You don't have to get into all these crazy details. Now, I would say that when we're talking about intensity, a lot of times people consider intensity percentage of 1 rep max, which is really the definition that you typically see in studies. But there is also rate of perceived exertion. So that's kind of what the layman might think, oh, how hard are you pushing yourself is how intense it is. So in this situation, it would depend on what your reason for maintenance is. If you need a maintenance phase because you're injured, right? Maybe your pec is kind of off, you might want to just say, okay, I'm not going to push it like crazy. I'm going to go to maybe a 6 or 7 RPE because I just don't want to mess anything up. If, on the other hand, you're just super busy and you can only fit it in once or twice per week, well, then that's when I would say push harder, push to a 9, push to a 10, go all out, because this is your only time during the entire week to do that. And if there's no injury there, then you can really push as hard as you want, and you're really not going to worry about overtraining or anything like that because the volume and the frequency are so low. So I would pick a few key exercises per muscle group. Maybe 1, maybe 2 exercises, okay? So you could do a barbell bench press, incline dumbbell bench, pull-ups, barbell rows, squat, and deadlift. Pick a few key exercises where you are really focused on strength. Not necessarily a 1 rep max, but really focusing on your strength in the, let's say, 6 to 15 rep range, and making sure that you're still able to hit that, okay? So if you are finishing, let's say, a phase when your volume is a lot higher and you have a lot of free time, and you're able to bench 225 for 8, well, you might be doing that over 5 sets, and during your maintenance phase, you might only be able to do that over 1 or 2 sets. But if you're still doing 225 for sets of 8, then you're probably gonna have a similar level of muscle mass as you were before. If you're still able to hit those same strength numbers. Yeah, you might not have as much of a pump walking around, but your actual muscle mass is gonna be pretty similar. So pick a few key exercises, hit them hard, and then get back to whatever you need to do in order to recover until you can get back to a time when you're actually able to get into the gym more frequently. Now, as far as other activities go, again, this depends on your reason for going into a maintenance phase. Sometimes people just get burnt out in the gym. They've been lifting for 6, 7, 8 years. They've been very consistent, and they just say, you know what, I need a mental break, so I'm gonna back off a little bit. In that case, you might want to pick up some other activity, some other sport that you might like, hiking, whatever you want to do. If it's a mental reason and you're just kind of tired of the gym, then cut it back to 1 or 2 a week and see how you do with that. If it's an injury that's affecting a specific body part, you might be able to do activities that aren't affecting that body part. If, on the other hand, it's because you're so busy, you just don't have time, well then of course you're also not going to have time for other activities. And so just look at your situation and see if it makes sense for you to be including other activities. And then finally, I would just comment on calories here. Obviously, if you're working out less, you're not going to need as many calories. And if you're in a maintenance phase, you're not going to be growing that much. And so you really don't need a surplus of calories. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend a deficit either. Sometimes people might say, well, I can at least lose fat during this phase. That's probably true. And I don't think it would necessarily be harmful because you can actually cut volume pretty dramatically, as I mentioned, and still maintain that muscle. So if this was a period when you just actually did want to try to lean out, that would be fine. But again, look to your reason for why you're taking the maintenance phase. If you're doing it for the mental break, probably not the best thing to just be hungry all the time. If you're doing it for injury recovery, probably not good to be in a deficit when you need those calories for recovery. So for the most part, for most people, I would say maintain. Now, again, you're probably going to be tracking calories in that case, or really, at least to some degree, focusing on the calories that you're eating, which can be mentally taxing if your reason for trying to maintain is because you don't want to be dealing with all of that. In that situation, I would say just weigh yourself every few days, see how your weight is fluctuating, and adjust accordingly. When I stopped tracking calories for about a year, this is pretty much what I did. So I would just kind of eat what I want. If my weight was going down, I'd eat a little bit more. If my weight was going up, I'd eat a little bit less. And I really wouldn't have to focus on it that much. I think that's a great way to do it without getting too obsessive. Again, especially if this is during a period where you're just trying to relax and not focus so much on the gym and diet and all of that. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you have any other questions about maintaining or how to go about this, feel free to post below.